Welcome to our subscriber-only special edition of Amusing PahRooZings. In this bonus episode, we hear deep insights from our peers and experts as they dive deeper into their advanced knowledge and experiences. Join our host, Michael Hobbs, real estate investor, entrepreneur, and chief appraiser, as he discusses perspectives that are impacting the industry and elevating how we analyze assets and improve valuation skills.
Well, welcome and thank you everybody for joining us for another engaging episode of Amusing PahRooZings. It's our opportunity to reconnect with some of our podcast guests from PahRooZings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast, those in and around the valuation profession, to hear what have they been up to, or what are they working on, or what's what are they contemplating these days, or what's occupying that gray matter in terms of what's of interest or what's of concern. So happy to have David Wilkes back with us. David, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Good to be back. Thank you, Michael.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So it's been a little bit since we caught up. What have you been up to? What have you been focused on, and what's on your mind?
Well, we're coming to the close of summer, and it's been a very busy summer. I'd say the first thing that's top of mind is we're finally, after 6 years, and I work in New York, and that's not that uncommon for a case to go on for many years in property tax, but wow. This one has been perhaps more work than I've ever had on any one case, and this has been a pretty interesting one from a valuation standpoint. And it involves in upstate New York, it involves a very large development community of really aiming at sort of ultra high net worth home sales and related amenities. And we, for quite a while now, we have been back and forth with the local municipality over this question of what's it worth? What are these homes worth? And my sort of daily fare is usually dealing with things like a New York City office building or something, or a big shopping mall. This is a really different animal. I don't normally deal with homes, but collectively, this is probably, I would say, on the order of maybe $700 million to $1 billion worth of real estate in one location. Wow. And the biggest question has been they trade at sale prices that are astronomical. And if you look right outside the gates of this community, and I use gates in quotes, but if you look right across the road, you'll see land and homes that sell for a 20th of what these homes sell for.
Oh,
easily.
Geez.
And so, wow. you could, literally, you could be looking at a land sale of $50,000 outside, which sells for $2 million or so, or whatever that number may be in that range inside the community. And the question has been, well, what's the real estate value? Is there something extra in there that's built into the sale prices that is something that shouldn't be taxed because it's something intangible that you pay when you buy into this, and you're getting these created amenities, luxury golf and luxury restaurants and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. And maybe more significantly, you're getting an exclusive community where I could only wish I was one of these people, but if I'm an ultra rich guy, I get to walk around all day and interact with other people that I might be doing business with and doing deals with. And so there's this extra sort of value component that will cause me to pay those kinds of prices to be in the community. And if I took that same home and I put it just somewhere else, it would sell for a lot less. So that's something that we've been working on back and forth with the government to come up with a way to address this. Also, just simple equity among the homes and things like that. So we're actually at a point where I'd say in a lot of ways, we probably didn't really see eye to eye. In New York, at least, a recent sale price that's arm's length is considered best evidence of value. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, and I've written about this, is there are reasons why those sale prices can sometimes be explained away if it's not sort of an ordinary sale. And I would say these are not ordinary sales, but it's a tough sell. And through a lot of negotiations and involvement with the court, we finally have come to a place where I'm, fingers crossed. I think we're going to get this over the line and actually come to a pretty fair resolution. But that's been occupying a lot of my time, and literally, I've got something like 140 different properties to essentially come up with a value for. And so in a lot of ways, I'm standing a little bit more in the shoes of a valuer or even an assessor than a lawyer. But that's been keeping me busy. So that's sort of first thing I can think about. Yeah.
And you mentioned at the outset that I think you said 6 years this has been going on for.
Yeah. We started this in 2019, and candidly, when this first came to me, I was very skeptical. I said to the folks who approached me, I said, I'm not quite sure we can get you where you want to go with this. I said, fighting against a sale price, it's a real uphill battle. It's sort of you're really fighting against the tide in terms of the way the courts see it, in terms of the way the local government sees it, and all that. But I kind of took it in provisionally and developed a theory over time. And again, part of it is just being in New York. Everything takes forever. So it was really, I'd say in the last 2 years or so, it started to bubble up to the point where we needed to go somewhere with it. We were either going to, go to trial or find a good resolution. And I'm happy to say, actually, one other component which might be worth mentioning is that part of this whole development involved also condominiums. And
really?
Very high-end condominiums, but in New York, these are the kind of condos that could sell for $4 or $5 million a unit. Yes. But in New York, we have a completely different methodology by statute for valuing condominiums. And there's nothing rational about it. It's just, this is what legislatures can do. They wanted to, at some point 40 years ago, they wanted to spur development of condominiums. And so there's a methodology in which you ignore sale prices. So actually the two components operate in very different ways, all within the same development. And of course, that's for the average homeowner or condo owner. It doesn't make any intuitive sense. But really simplified, basically the law says arm's length sale is strong evidence of value, but not in a condominium. In a condominium, they're going to value it as if based on an income approach, based on the whole, as if you took all the units and were to rent them out. Right.
Oh, that's quite a unique divergence from many other municipalities and approaches that assessors take to move over to that approach, which is much less commonly practiced.
Right. And it's also, by the way, just to make things even more complicated, it's not necessarily always the case throughout all of New York State. There are some jurisdictions that can opt into a different scheme, and it's all over the place. So it helps. This is one of those areas where local knowledge means a lot.
Very much. What a huge difference, as you pointed out, in terms of looking at the condominiums and then moving towards the aggregate and for the income approach. Right. Most people, that would just sail right over their head, not even sure what you said or why it mattered.
Right.
Does that, I'm just curious, in regards to that jurisdiction and that asset type, does that mean an individual condominium owner cannot appeal their property taxes, or they have to do it as an association only?
It's a great question, because effectively the answer is you're correct. They can't, because you really need sort of the buy-in. And typically when we do a lot of condominium work, we do a lot of condos, for instance, in New York City, where condos and co-ops are really common. Yes. And you are generally operating through the management company or through the association for the condo or the co-op, because it does need to be coordinated, and it is this. Effectively, the law doesn't say this, but effectively, what you're doing is you're treating it as if it's an apartment building, and so in that case,
absolutely
right, you would just be dealing with the owner of the apartment building. So having a one-off where you're just looking at one unit really doesn't work.
Completely makes sense. And that is an approach that we use with some regularity in Cook County when there's an appropriate concentration of rentals in a condominium building, with the argument that apartment building may be the highest and best use. So,
Right. Right.
Fascinating approach. And so, for those that maybe don't practice in the ad valorem area, and specifically with tax assessment, you mentioned it's been going on for 6 years. So, when this settles, its origination date was 6 years ago. Does that mean you'll have subsequent years to litigate, or will it be more of a waterfall effect to current?
Well, little of both in some ways. I really, what often happens in New York, these when you enter into a settlement, it can go in a few different directions. Just the sort of the standard would be that if let's just simplify to say I'm representing an office building, and we've been filing protests over the last 6 years. So typically, what will happen is the resolution will cover those 6 years. It'll go backwards in time. We'll look at the value for each year and reset it to where it should be, and the owner may be getting refunds for those years. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but in terms of
Sure.
What does it look like going forward will depend on the jurisdiction and its practices. It could be that the lower assessment that we've gotten to is going to hold going into the future. Subject to maybe new construction or something like that. But generally, it'll hold. Some jurisdictions, it has no meaning at all in the future, and the assessor can come back and reassess if they choose to. And in some cases, which is a little bit more along the lines of what we're dealing with in this particular case, is we're able to negotiate a little bit into the future and also going backwards. So we're sort of dealing with maybe not all of those 6 years. In some ways, those 6 years give us some leverage to negotiate, but we're not necessarily getting a resolution on all of them. We're maybe walking away from some of it. We're getting what we think is a good deal currently, and then maybe into the future for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or something like that. And then, it's just the nature of property taxes. They keep coming. And so at some point, we may be back at it. I hope for these owners, things have been reset to a good place for a while. And, they have my number in the future. That's the way it goes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And for those that are not familiar with the process, what was it that had the client approach you in the first place? Obviously, they felt that there was unjust in what they were being asked to be paying. How did that come together for your representation?
The market right now is tough for appraisal companies. Many companies are having a hard time getting enough work with the same marketing they used to. Is your company struggling? Having a hard time getting new customers or getting additional work from existing customers? The answer to this problem is easier than you think. Do more business with the people you already know. Over 10 years, the average U.S. appraisal firm meets over 17,000 potential customers. That's a lot of people you could be doing business with right now. But it's a big problem if you don't have a proven process to communicate with them. StoryLex turns this problem into an opportunity to grow. Our advanced AI marketing tool can rebuild your contact lists and harvest long-forgotten communications. Imagine reaching out to everyone you've ever met with just one click. For the cost of 1 or 2 appraisals a month, StoryLex helps you reconnect and market to people who already know you, like you, trust you, and want to do business with you. Act now by contacting StoryLex today to turn your business growth dreams into reality. Email appraisal@storylux.com. That is appraisal@storylux.com. And now back to part 2 of the episode.
There were a couple of factors. I would say primarily one factor was homeowners, especially in a community like this, where you have very large homes, but in some ways they're very similar. They're sort of very much based on similar models, and obviously they're each one is a bit unique, but they're kind of coming from the same developer, same time period, let's say within the same 2-3 years of each other or something. But they were noticing big disparities in the assessments among them. So you could have your 5,000 square foot, $7 million home, and the neighbor has a 5,000 square foot home, and it's valued at $4 million, something like that. And you'd say, well, why is that? And so part of it was this question of equity, feeling like
Yes.
the assessments were a bit random. And then I think the other part was just what I mentioned before about how is it that because a lot of people, by the way, would buy a piece of land, a parcel of land, and in this case, it could be less than a half an acre, and it might be sold for $2 million and assessed as if it was around $2 million. But they look across the road, at somebody who's not in the community, and they're assessed for that same size parcel, pretty similar location, and it's at $50,000, and they're saying, well, how could that be? And so it really began with more of the kind of, looking around you and saying, well, how come I'm being taxed so much higher or differently than another parcel? So I think a lot of it came out of that, really, to begin with.
Oh, that completely makes
Yeah.
sense. And what was fundamentally their position on, aside from the lack of equality of the assessments, or is that the strongest basis for moving forward with an appeal?
Well, I guess the primary argument would be we look at what these things sell for, and that's our
Yes.
guide. In fact, I had met with the former assessor because this has been going on for 6 years, so we're now on a second assessor even.
Oh,
But
wow.
but I had met with the former assessor. He was a very very pleasant person to deal with, and I sat in his office and we talked about it. And I said, "How do you explain the comparable land that's right across the way being so different?" And he said, "I don't have to look across the street. I could look right next door and I see what they sell for, and why should I look anywhere else?" And I obviously I disagreed with him,
Yeah.
but that was his position.
Yeah, that isn't that interesting when it goes that way.
Right, right, right.
This is how I see it. I'm like, could I offer you a different set of glasses?
Right, right. Yeah, I think so. I think, unfortunately, I think what happens in a lot of these cases is that at some point there's a there's a kind of rigorous methodological way to look at valuation. That's where we start from. And at some point, and especially if you factor in 6 years of going back and forth and the uncertainty and all of the financial implications of all this stuff, I think there's a certain amount of wearing down, that goes on where at some point the parties say, look, we don't know where this is going, but we need to get this thing resolved. And so there is the natural sort of give on either side. So we may have given up a bit on maybe what our original theory was, and I think the town would also do that to some extent. I think you see that in a lot of cases. We have cases in big cities where we've got large hotels, office buildings, and we're never really aligned. We're never really just coming to a complete agreement. But I think a good settlement is both parties sort of realize that it's time to get this thing done, and really ultimately not leave it to whatever decision you may get out of a court. That might be worth pointing out too, is that I find that in New York, I think that when I look at New York, let's say compared to the system and the process, the judicial process in in other states, New York is probably among the worst in that we don't have a specialized tax tribunal. We don't have judges who are trained and
Mm.
specialized in valuation, especially when it comes to large commercial properties. For example, something complicated like the valuation of a large shopping mall. It's not straightforward, and even appraisal experts can significantly disagree, and but bringing that to a judge to resolve is really not good for anybody. It's like a flip of a
No.
coin. We actually had I mentioned I had a very large shopping mall case.
Hmm.
That got resolved about a year, this past year or so. The difference, I mean, you look at the delta between the two appraisal experts. We haven't gone to court even, and you've got
Right.
the town. Let's say it was like $80 million for the shopping mall. We were at about $17 million for the shopping
Oh,
mall.
wow.
Huge delta.
Jeez.
And we did get it resolved. I'd say we got it very, very favorably resolved for the mall owner. But you could just imagine what that looks like giving it to a judge who has no real experience with valuing shopping malls. And what they know is what each appraiser is telling them. And there's not a lot between the two experts, and both very qualified experts, by the way. But, just taking each approach through a very different lens and different ideas and, looking at different sources for cap rates and all that other stuff. So, it's kind of the rare case that you really feel like we're best served by going to the court for a decision.
I completely agree. And like you said, if you don't have those magistrates that specifically are in that space consistently, boy, that is a bit of a wild card taking that to trial.
And unfortunate in a place like New York, which is such a high tax state to begin with, too. Yes. So we're not really talking about insignificant dollar issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very much so. As a resident of Cook County, Illinois,
right,
which has some joyous experiences akin to the ones that you regularly litigate. Whoa, it's quite the experience.
Sure.
And quite the burden at the same time. Wow. David, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's a unique perspective and one that most people don't get access to.
Happy to do it.
I would love to hear, if you would, just maybe as we maybe move towards wrapping up. You mentioned that in a recent matter you were involved in, there were two professionals, significant difference in valuation. You've been around this for your professional career. What do you continue to see when those differences show up?
I think some of it can be, I would almost say that to some extent, my experience has often been, it's what I would call the how could it be? How could this big shiny mall with all these shiny tenants and I'll hear things from the government side, things like, we see a lot of cars in the parking lot. That's one that I hear more than I probably should. I just heard this the other day on a large office building I'm working on. The building is literally vacant, and they said, well, we went to the building and we see a lot of cars in the parking lot. Well, okay, it actually happens to be that there are electric charging, car charging units that people just use because they're there.
My gosh.
Things like that. But there is this sort of, how could it be when you look at it, talking about shopping malls. So you'll end up, if you really, I always say, let's look at net effective rent, not the face rent. And so you look at how important it is, I think, of all things in a shopping mall, having a dark store is the kiss of death. And that replicating effect where you've got one dark store and you start to see more and more. So it's really important on the economics of running a shopping mall to keep those lights on. And oftentimes, really look at the concessions, really look at what it took to fill the space. And so as much as it looks nice from the outside, is the appraiser really digging into the economics of the property and truly what would this thing sell for? So I think, things like that are kind of the big takeaways from some of that. And it applies to office buildings too. We have office buildings that, sold at what looks like a rich price, but you really look at what it costs to get those tenants in, the amenities, and especially today, and, think about the interest costs on CapEx and all that stuff. It's often really not what it looks like. So I think the big thing is the appraiser really digging into the true economics of the building and seeing it from an owner's perspective rather than just the outside.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Couldn't agree with you more so. It's always interesting when someone says, so-and-so said it's worth a certain amount, or I have a report that says this. I said, hey, that's fantastic. I don't know that I don't have an opinion on it. I don't know what their basis of development is. And until you get a chance to dig into it, like you said, base rent versus net effective rent, it could be wildly different.
And if we have a minute, just to add,
yes, please.
One experience I had just recently was just like almost a textbook example of what the outside may not realize. We had negotiations with the city in New York, and I brought in, the city kept saying, but they paid all this, these two big sister office buildings, and they paid all this money for it, and that's kind of where our tax assessment is. So how could you possibly say it's worth less? We brought in the asset manager who was involved in the deal to talk directly with the city. I just said, let them hear it straight from their mouth, from the owner's mouth, not just from me. Okay. And they explained that, they said, if you look at it, we've got another building, very large building, that's about 100 yards down the road from these. What was really important for us was capturing that market and what was the competition. These two other buildings were direct competitors. It was worth paying a premium to be able to control that local market in that area.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily worth to anybody else what we paid for them. And that's a really important distinction. So, things like that, really kind of, lifting up the hood, looking under it and really understanding the transaction, not just looking at the face of it. So
that's so important and so helpful to bring in the perspective of participants who clearly know more than just looking at documents or data.
Right.
There's always so much more, as you said, underneath the hood.
Exactly. So
absolutely love it. David, I appreciate taking a little time just to catch us up on what you've been up to and some of the interesting matters you've been handling.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure, Michael. It's always good to see you and happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, again, thanks so much. Have a great back end of summer and look forward to connecting with you next several months. Just check in again, how things are going and what you're up to.
All right, I will. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks, you friends, for joining us.
Thank you for joining this special subscriber-only journey through our bonus episodes of Amusing PahRooZings. These exclusive sessions let us explore how advanced technologies are revolutionizing real estate valuation and appraisal right at the center of industry transformation. Would you do something for someone you may never meet and that has no cost but has significant impact? Who is one person that comes to mind you can share this valuable resource with who also values learning and growing, possibly even making a big impact in the real estate appraisal world? Please go ahead and share.